Okay, and we should be recording now. We might have a few more people joining us. I'll just keep an eye out on the tab and see if anyone else pops in. But welcome. This is I think our third video in this training series. We're going to be talking about problem gambling tonight. If you haven't seen our other videos, I recommend that you go to our new YouTube channel and you check out the live recordings that we've actually uploaded there. And you can find us under City of Somerville Prevention Services if you just type that into the YouTube search bar. And we're going to upload this there as well. So if there are slides that you maybe don't get quite enough time to look at, or if you wanted to have some time later to write down references or treatment recommendations, all of that will be there as well. So let's get started. And for people also who are joining us just for the first time, my name is Kira. I am the Substance Use Prevention Coordinator for City of Somerville, and I'm the one who is hosting a lot of these training series videos throughout the summer. And let's go from here. So just a couple of quick objectives for today. What is problem gambling? We're going to go into a little bit of the history of gambling, the brain on problem gambling, consequences, treatment, some specific Massachusetts laws, and we're also going to be getting an update from our SCAP director, Lovely Botari Heller, on the Youth Photo Voice project. And also have time at the end for Q&A. However, we are going to be breaking this up a little bit tonight for some more interactive moments. That was one of the bits of feedback we had gotten. And when we get to those moments, I'm just going to ask that people write their answers down in the chat box, and we will take a look at things from there. So I'm hoping that this video actually works today. We had some technical difficulties with this last time, but this is a video that I just want to let everybody kind of take a peek at. I'm just going to. And if you can't hear the volume on this, please feel free to let me know in the chat box or even just stop me.
It's $1 billion. Woo! Seriously?
So that's what $1 billion looks like. Real money.
Oh my goodness. Wow, that's a lot of money.
These cities can use the money for where they see a need.
What a great reason to play the lottery.
That's crazy. That's really great that the Mass Lottery does that.
That's pretty impressive.
Okay, and now we'll just pop back onto our PowerPoint here. So before I move on to the next slide, if people want to just take kind of a quick moment to think about some of just the initial takeaways that you have in response to that video, I'll give people a couple seconds just to kind of get that in mind. And I think what I'd like to do next is just have people kind of report some of the things that they noticed in the chat section and kind of respond to everyone instead of sending it to me or anyone else privately. So I'm seeing from one person here in quotations, what a great reason to play the lottery. Anyone else have anything that they want to type in terms of feedback? Again, I'll give people another couple of seconds. Okay, so, okay, thank you, Bonnie, for your feedback. Excuse me. So for those individuals who might be watching this video in the future or a little bit later and you aren't able to see the chat box, again, some of the things that I'm seeing in the chat box right now are, again, in quotations, oh, what a great reason to play the lottery. And then from someone else, it's hard to argue the addictive dangers when it looks so positive a thing for the community. Anyone else? Again, just another 10 seconds or so. So I think one of the initial things that we need to talk about here is, I mean, the thing I took away, as was pointed actually out to me by my manager, is this little segment that I'm circling kind of down here on the bottom of the page, which is this in teeny tiny little parentheses. You must be 18 years or older to play. But this lottery commercial has no reference, for, I guess in some cases, some pretty obvious reasons, as to any of the consequences of gambling, where all of this money came from, which is in fact people spending their own money on lottery tickets over and over and over again. And the thing I think that I also found disappointing was that there is no messaging, again, kind of towards the bottom, I guess it would have been towards the bottom of this video screen, about, you know, hey, problem gambling may in fact be an issue. You know, if you feel like you are struggling with this, please contact this agency or this hotline in order to get some help. This whole commercial is only really focusing on, again, the fact that, oh, wow, look, there's this huge pile of money. This is $1 billion, like literally $1 billion that we're looking at here. And we're giving this back towards the community. And they're completely diffusing the focus away from anything else, which leads us into our next segment. Oh, wait, one more second. Getting another bit of feedback in the chat box. What about the state of losing your money, your family, etc.? Exactly. None of that messaging is present in this commercial. It's only about the positive nature of the money going back into the community. And it's also interesting to note that they don't actually tell you what part of the community that this is going to positively impact. You know, they're not saying, hey, we are specifically sending this back into our school system or into construction projects or into our healthcare system. It's just a very blanket overall use of the word community, which again, if I can get my clicker to work here, leads us into a couple of interesting questions around problem gambling, especially, again, the perception of harm and the risks that come with problem gambling. Sorry. The use of advertising and messaging, especially in the very virtual world that we live in today, and also the cost. What is the cost to problem gambling on individuals, on families, and again, overall on the community? And this is something that can apply really to a variety of different people in our community. There are a lot of different factors here in terms of age, race, socioeconomic status, and I will be getting into all of that a little bit later on in the course of today's training session. But definitely one of the things that we are going to highlight towards the end of this is especially the impact of all of this advertising and messaging on youth, because that is looking very different now from how it might have been 20, 30 years ago. But before I move on, again, just kind of initial takeaways from that video that we just watched. Anyone have anything that they want to throw into the chat box around, again, harm and risk, advertising, cost, and consequences? Before we move on, I'll give people a couple seconds just to chime in. Okay, we have one response here in our chat box, which I'm trying to open. Excuse the technical difficulties here. Okay. So from one individual in the chat box, we're saying, if I was a youth, I wouldn't see a reason not to think. about gambling. Okay, that's definitely definitely true. And again, like I said, we'll get into that a little bit later on in the course of today's presentation. Anyone else? I'm going to give people another couple seconds before I move on. Okay, so I'll just minimize chat box again, and we're going to continue from this point forward, if I can get my computer to cooperate. So I want to talk for a brief moment here about Massachusetts and problem gambling, and all of the statistics that I'm about to share are coming from the Mass Council on Compulsive Gambling. And sorry, I just need to let some other people into our waiting from the waiting room into the series. Okay, that should be all taken care of. So according to the Mass Council on Compulsive Gambling, about 75% of the entire adult population in Massachusetts has engaged in at least one sort of gambling activity in the past year. And that is not limited to just one specific type of gambling. It involves a myriad of different things, which we'll get into actually in the next slide. Interestingly enough, of those residents, 3/5 of them reported specifically playing the lottery. And it's now estimated that about 2% of the adult population in Massachusetts has a gambling disorder diagnosis. And another 8.5-ish% of adults are at risk of developing a gambling disorder. So we also need to kind of take a moment here to really ask ourselves, what exactly is problem gambling and how is it different from just kind of quote unquote regular gambling? So again, another great definition here from the Mass Council on Compulsive Gambling, risking something of value on the outcome of an event when the probability of winning is less than certain. And one of the things that I have had to even remind myself about recently is value does not always equal money. You could be in a problem gambling situation, and instead of exchanging cash or credit, you could be talking about, well, I will give you this really valuable item. That could be anything from a piece of jewelry to your phone, to some other sort of personal possession, which in fact may or may not belong to you. It could be an exchange in terms of relationships, in terms of services. Value is really how you define it to be. And that is one of the reasons why problem gambling can be very, very detrimental in terms of the consequences the longer that it goes unchecked for. So to build off of that, there are a couple of different things on what we call the spectrum of gambling. There are people who just don't gamble, period. You have social gamblers. So someone who, like, I think from my instance, my grandfather, when he was still alive, liked to give me a lottery ticket every year for my birthday. And I would scratch it, and usually I ended up winning nothing. But that was basically the one and only time a year up until he passed that I had anything to do with gambling. You have the next level up, which is more serious social gambling. So maybe you're spending a lot of time having poker tournaments with your friends on the weekends, or you're going out to a casino together, or maybe you're part of a fantasy sports league that it has some betting involved in it. There are even workplace offices that actually have kind of pools, so to speak, set up around sports and bets placed on who wins and who doesn't win. The next category is problem/professional gambling. Problem gambling at this point is what we had just discussed about exchanging or offering things of high value with low probability or uncertainty of winning. We also put professional gamblers into this category. There are certainly many people out there who identify as being professional poker players, for instance, who play games as almost, their career. It's their way of earning an income. And problem/professional gamblers make up about 3 to 4% of overall adult gamblers. And then the final category is disordered gambling. And that is when we are looking at gambling that has some very, very serious addictive consequences to it, and a lot of other layers, which again, we are going to be getting into in a moment. So just before I move on, gambling obviously looks like a lot of different things to a lot of different people. There are some examples that I think are pretty standard, you know, when you think about what gambling looks like, but I want to take a moment to again just stop and have people go into the chat box and just name off a couple of different types of modern day gambling that just kind of come to the top of your head. And like I said, we'll take a couple of seconds to let people type in their answers here. I have one person saying Keno. Yep, definitely Keno. Anyone else? Oh, yep, another one for Keno. Yep. Okay. Anybody else? Phone apps, sports pools. Okay. And just a couple more seconds. Oh, yep, sports and video games. Yep, definitely for sure. And we're going to get into that specifically actually in just a couple of slides. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to keep on moving ahead. If you please feel free to keep on putting your answers into the chat box while I'm talking. So we have again lottery / Keno. Oh, wait 1 second. I'm getting another couple of responses here. Lottery, yes, and Keno. And someone in the chat box wants me to explain what Keno is a little bit more specifically. Going to guess that this is something that maybe you're not super familiar with. So Keno is very similar to the lottery. It can be played at casinos, but it's also something that you can actually sometimes do at the state lottery level as well. Basically, you choose numbers ranging between 1 to 80, and then you place wagers. And then at that point, once you've placed your wager, usually around 20 numbers are drawn at random, sometimes with a ball machine or with a random number generator. And at that point, I think that the more numbers that you have correctly chosen, the better. I'm also seeing here from another person, thank you very much, that Keno actually can be played in restaurants and bars too, which is a good point to make. Hopefully that was a relatively decent example. So again, lottery, Keno, raffles, bingo, televised gambling, scratch tickets, horse and dog racing, although I think that's a little less common these days, casino gambling, slot machines, poker, roulette, things like that, sports betting, and that's everything from, you know, Super Bowl to car races like NASCAR, online esports betting around games like League of Legends and Fortnite. And then also a relatively new addition, which is video game loot boxes. For those of you who do not know any pre-teens or youth who are under the age, and sometimes even around the age of, I'd say 20 and under, you have these games that you can play both on handheld electronic game devices and then also your phone, or sometimes even on the internet, like Minecraft, Candy Crush, Roblox. I would say that Minecraft and Roblox are probably the newest forms. I think most people, I include myself in this. I remember when Candy Crush initially came out, all of those years ago, and how, in order to, let's say you would go through 5 or 10 levels and you would pass them, and then you would get to this special chest, but you had to be able to pay some form of, I think it was gold bars or chocolate bars or something in order to get it open. And if you didn't have enough from winning in the game, you could buy some. That's basically a decent example of, I guess, what a loot box is. And for more modern day games like Minecraft and Roblox, which predominantly are being played by youth, loot boxes, you actually generally have to pay with cash. And you might have seen both, at even supermarket or places like Target, gift cards essentially that you can buy for Minecraft and Roblox loot boxes. And then I'm getting another chat comment here. Someone asked her 16-year-old grandson if he knew about loot boxes, and he said it's super, super common amongst his age group. Absolutely. And let me just see here. And then I have another comment from someone else. My 8-year-old nephew bothers his mother all the time for Roblox money. I actually am thinking about a clinical case that I was working on within, I think, a year or so ago, where I was working with a middle school student who was absolutely obsessed with both Roblox and also with Minecraft and Fortnite, and was just spending so much money, not just for the loot boxes, but just for many different aspects of the games as well. I'm also seeing another comment here. Thank you all so much for adding these comments. I'm seeing more and more Facebook groups hosting raffles for items, and you can just Venmo the host the money. Absolutely. And the person who sent this in, I remember we were talking about how, especially during the shutdown, this is something that seems to have become a little bit more common, just I think because people are at home, they may be bored, and they may just kind of be trying to socially connect with other people. So definitely the pandemic is also something that we need to address here in terms of how it is impacting rates of gambling. I think when it comes to video games, especially again for the youth, there is definitely a lot of focus on that at the moment, just because again, no one's at school yet. And also you've been shut up at home for 5 months. So we definitely need to continue to focus on youth prevention. And I also need to get going on this presentation. So just a couple of other quick little Massachusetts facts. Only adults 18 years and older can gamble, and you must be 21 and older to enter the casino, which leads us to another interesting point, which is Massachusetts back in 2011 passed something called the Expanded Gaming Act. Oh, sorry, sirens are outside of my window at the moment. Hopefully they pass. Which allowed for the creation of a 1-slot parlor at Plainridge Park and 3 resort-style casinos, which for those of us in Boston, we are pretty familiar with the giant brown shiny building that is the Encore Everett Casino. There's also the MGM Springfield Casino. There's one unbuilt casino, which to my knowledge, there hasn't been any specific contract signed for any particular casino organization yet. Obviously, especially now with the shutdown, that's probably going to be even more so the case. And the Expanded Gaming Act does also dictate, as shown in the video earlier, some funding from the casinos must go towards treatment and public health. I did a little bit of research on this myself earlier. It seems like Massachusetts is doing a lot of funding of construction projects at the moment, which I unfortunately don't have all of the time in the world to get to. But I do have a link right down here for the massgaming.com website in terms of how some of that money is being spent throughout the community. Oh, wait, oops, hang on, I did not mean to click on that. Let's go back to PowerPoint. And now I think one of the other things that I want to talk about too is just a little bit around the history of problem gambling and how long exactly this has been a part of our culture, but also how it's evolved within our culture. So again, I'm going to take the opportunity to just have people go into the chat box, and I just want to ask people to guess when they think the very first sort of gambling game might have been first set up in human history. And again, we're going to make this pretty quick, so I'm only going to give people, like, again, 20 or so seconds to get this done. Do I have any guesses? I'm seeing from one person 300 BC. Okay, anyone else have any guesses? No other guesses? Okay. So, I'm just going to close the chat box up again here. The answer, unfortunately, to the one person who responded, you're sadly incorrect. The answer is around 3000 BC. And the interesting thing for me about this is that gambling and strategy games and board games can be traced throughout the globe. You see board games and strategy games being used as forms of gambling in every single part of the world. Europe, Asia, Africa, and also definitely South America. here are a couple of different examples that we have. I think the oldest one that I was able to find is this board game right here, actually, which is pictured on the left, which is called the Royal Game of Ur, which is played in ancient Mesopotamia, which is now known as modern-day Iraq and Iran. Unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of time to play on this, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about, just looking at all of the different examples of these different games and the ways in which they were played, is the fact that from the beginning, gambling has been a very social activity in a lot of ways. And it is also something that has been very, very much connected with a definite theme of competition. And that is something that, again, we can trace back to thousands and thousands of years. We have probably my favorite picture on here is of a group of men in Pompeii. This is actually from a mural in Pompeii, of a bunch of men playing what we think is a game of backgammon. And I don't know about you, but that guy looks like he's either laying down some money or he is pretty upset with his opponent, who seems to be doing quite well at the moment. Another interesting example is also just how these games have changed throughout history. This is the game called Nine Men's Morris, which is being played by a group of Spanish men around the time of, I believe, 1550. And this thing that they're playing with right now actually is, you know, basically the ancestor of what is now modern day checkers. So obviously there have been a lot of different changes to that game over the course of history. Now, by the time we get to slightly more modern history, I want to show you two very, very different pictures and images of what gambling looked like at around the Victorian era, which is kind of towards the end of the 19th century. On the one hand, over here on the left, you have this really large group of beautifully dressed, presumably quite wealthy individuals playing in some sort of, I would say, hotel or casino. And then you have this group of fellows right over here on the right who are definitely playing in quite a different sort of environment. I think the interesting thing for me, and one of the things that has made problem gambling such a complicated subject for all of us, is that similar to alcohol, gambling was just something that is considered to be socially acceptable across gender, across age, across socioeconomic classes. As we can see here on the left, if you belong to certain socioeconomic classes, it was expected actually that you know how to gamble and play a variety of different card games just because it was such a common form of entertainment. So the interesting question, and this is where we start to get a little bit more into the whole treatment aspect and the consequences of gambling, is when does gambling go from being a genteel form of casual entertainment to being something with some much darker consequences involved in it? Who is susceptible? Who is not susceptible? And also, again, at a societal level, what, again, as we said in the very first couple slides of this presentation, what exactly is the messaging even that we are sending out about what problem gambling is? So let's flash forward to 2020. So here are a couple of different more modern examples of gambling that we have. Loot boxes. I believe this is a Fortnite loot box. We have this massive display of screens showing what I believe is sports betting. And then down here we have a esports tournament taking place in the stadium. And that is something else that, again, we need to definitely keep in mind, that especially with the increase in our use of the internet and handheld games, there's just been an increasing shift to online forms of gambling and betting and spending. And again, the same factors still apply even to this day in terms of how this is a very competitive form of entertainment. It's very social, and it's just very, very casually accepted across many different levels. So again, if we think about the spectrum of problem gambling and how it differs from, say, social gambling, what exactly leads to problem gambling / disordered gambling? So we have a couple of different things here. Individuals who have substance use and mental health issues have 10 times the risk for developing problem gambling behaviors. It's estimated that about 73% of problem gamblers also had an alcohol use disorder. Another 38% had some other form of substance use disorder, and 60% were nicotine dependent. There's another study from 2015 that also shows the more you gamble, the more likely you are to consume alcohol. And this also applies to marijuana and tobacco as well. They also noted that males, younger adults, and those of lower socioeconomic statuses definitely had a much higher risk for developing problem gambling. And Black men are also especially more at risk for developing problem gambling. And I know it seems like we're rushing through this a little bit, so I just want to take a quick second here and just check in if anyone has any questions before I move into the next segment. Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat box quite yet, but I'll keep my eye out for that. So now we start to get into some other aspects of gambling. And for those of us, and I include myself in this, who did not take any neurology classes when at any point in your education, you might not think that there's too much of a significant difference between this image of brains up here on the upper part of the screen and this image of brains down here on the left. And that is actually the whole point. This section of the brain is the prefrontal and frontal cortex, which is basically this part of the brain that has to do with emotions and decision making and many other different important aspects in terms of focus and impulse control. And the thing that we have discovered through the magic of MRIs is that when you have a gambler who is in a situation where they know that they are about to win a game, a whole lot of activity blossoms up in the brain in those specific areas. You also have down here the near miss, for people who are basically are about to lose a game, but still think that they might have a chance of actually pulling through and winning. There's not a whole lot of difference, and that is because at the end of the day, the part of the brain that has to do with impulse control and emotional regulation is being very, very activated. It doesn't matter if you are winning or you think that you're about to win, the brain is going to turn on in the same way every single time. And it's going to want to make you just continue to push forward and gamble more and more and more. A couple of other things that we want to think about, and this leads us into some other aspects around mental health specifically, is incarcerated individuals have 20 times the risk for developing problem gambling. And other risk factors also include especially anxiety, stress, an addiction history, having a family history of gambling problems, impulsivity, problems with attention and focus, and also a lot of emotional difficulties, which could range from anything from trauma and PTSD to bipolar disorder to, again, more general depression. I definitely have done a fair share of work with individuals, both who were involved in the legal system and who were not, but we're definitely all struggling with different mood disorders. And problem gambling was definitely something that was a major part of their daily lives. And sometimes not their daily lives, but it happening on a frequent enough basis that it was something that we typically needed to bring up in the course of treatment. There are a bunch of warning signs, which just leads me to remember I should hide that from you. And again, I'm going to take this opportunity to just ask people to put some things into the chat box. What do you think are some of the warning signs of problem gambling? And again, I'll give people a couple of seconds to put in some of their guesses into the chat box. And while I'm doing that, again, for the sake of our viewers who are maybe watching this after the live recording is done, we have someone else in the chat box who is making a general statement, not a question, that children and young people often experience a great deal of worry sitting with their parents while watching them play Keno in convenience stores and watching their parents experience the highs and lows of the problem gambling. In terms of this, again, this more active question about warning signs, we have people who chase bets, losing more than you plan to, borrowing money to cover your losses. We also have someone else saying spending large portions of your paycheck on problem gambling. So definitely all of these are absolutely accurate, and we're going to go into a couple of more of the, just as soon as people are done with the chat box. Spending money that you can't afford to lose, absolutely. Lying about the amount that you spend, also very, very true. So just to keep us on time, I'm going to move on. So basically all of the things that you all mentioned actually fit perfectly into a lot of the very typical warning signs of problem gambling. I think one thing that I will mention that was not pointed out was spending a lot of time thinking about gambling or thinking about or planning to gamble, basically preparing yourself mentally of how am I going to do this? When am I going to go to the store after work and buy this many tickets for this much money in order to get this much back? There are a lot of people who also report feeling very restless or irritable when they're not gambling. A couple of other warning signs, which again, some of which we've already gone into, is stealing and selling things to keep gambling or to pay gambling debts. I had a client in the past who actually unfortunately ended up selling after stealing. Well, they stole their grandmother's entire collection of jewelry in order to gamble, and that really permanently kind of damaged their relationship with one another. I'm also seeing on here again, gambling to escape problems, boredom, or to relieve feelings of anxiety, depression, irritability, being criticized by others for your gambling, and also missing work and school and other personal commitments because of your decision to problem gamble. And also definitely, again, with everything that is going on right now with the shutdown and with COVID, definitely this is a problem that I think youth are going to be struggling with, but also, again, adults as well in general. So something that is unique to problem gambling is a little something called the gambler's fallacy, which is pretty well summarized in this little picture right down here. But it's basically the persistent belief that a win is going to be coming, even though gambling is obviously completely based on, frankly, luck and random chance. So one example of that, which is something that we actually are seeing a lot of in terms of marketing and advertising, is convenience stores who have had met past Powerball winners. They'll put up posters to advertise that fact in their windows in order to gain customers, because a lot of problem gamblers believe that if you buy a lottery ticket at that same store, it's going to lead to an increased chance of you actually winning. You might also have people who believe that they have a lucky hat or like a lucky time of day in order to go to the casino or to go and get a scratch ticket, and it'll mean they have a higher chance of winning. I'm also seeing here from another person in the chat box, another warning sign, being so worried that one won't be able to make enough money to live a life that one wants / hopes for. Definitely very, very true. There's also something called the near miss phenomenon, which is again very unique to gambling. And this is something that occurs when we almost win. And the gambler is going to take that as a sign that they should keep playing in order to win next time. This is something that we had actually talked about a little bit earlier with those MRI brain scans that I had shown you all. And that is the one thing I will comment on that I didn't quite touch on earlier, is that gambling, like other forms of addiction, especially substance use addiction, is very heavily based off of cravings. Now, obviously, the cravings that you have for gambling are not going to look the same as the cravings that you might have for alcohol if you're struggling with alcohol use, or with cocaine, or with opiates. But there is definitely a very biological basis for why people crave gambling so much, and then also why they have such a difficult time stopping later on. Which leads us pretty nicely into the whole subject around treating problem gambling. So I think I just mentioned to you, problem gambling has a lot of similarities to substance use in terms of symptom presentation and consequences, but there are a couple of really significant and important differences that do make the two of them quite different in terms of treatment. So first of all, with substances, whether again it's alcohol, opiates, heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, meth, that substance is going to cause the same reaction in the brain every single time. Gambling, again, it's so based on luck and random happenstance that the brain is going to be impacted a little bit differently every single time you win or lose. Another thing to point out here is that, let's say, again, for alcohol and opiates especially, there's only so much alcohol or opiates that you can put into your body before the body shuts down, whether that be due to an overdose or a blackout, whatever that happens to look like. Gambling, you don't have those limitations set up in place with the body. There's no limit on how much you can actually gamble before there's some sort of physical consequence on your body in the same way there would be, again, with alcohol and blackouts. There's no biological test for gambling. We cannot test people, in terms of breathalyzers or blood or urine tests. There is no obvious physical symptoms attributed to gambling behaviors. You might be able to tell that someone is, for instance, smoking cigarettes or marijuana because of the scent in the air and on their person after they're done smoking. There are also similar signs for other substances like alcohol, opiates, etc. But with gambling, there's absolutely no outside presentation. And for that reason, gambling is often much easier to hide from people than substance use because it's not so immediately obvious. There may also be a lot of significantly higher amounts of financial problems associated with problem gambling. That's not to say that substance use does not certainly have a lot of financial loss associated with it, because it certainly does. But with problem gambling, I know I have heard of people spending anywhere from, in the higher cases, probably $50,000 to several hundred thousands of dollars when it comes to gambling. Loved ones may also be less upset with you because of your problem gambling than with substance use, because again, as we were talking about earlier, there's so much societal acceptance around gambling. It's one of just those casual things that everybody sees very commonly. Someone else is also pointing out here in the group chat, in terms of financial problems. Yes, absolutely. Small amounts of gambling add up over time, absolutely correct. And that is just something that in some cases, it might even be worse for the person in question, because all of a sudden, what has been $5 here and $10 here sometimes turns into thousands and thousands of dollars over the course of many months if left unchecked. Another issue with treating problem gambling is there's a lot less public awareness and stigmas around problem gambling, as seen in that video that we watched at the very beginning of this training session. Thankfully, though, there are a lot of different treatment resources that are available to folks. It's not a situation where you can necessarily say get inpatient hospitalized due to your problem gambling, but there are a lot of resources that do exist out there. I've tried to put on as many different virtual ones as I can, considering the state of the shutdown at the moment. But some very good options would be the Integrated Problem Gambling and Substance Use Hotline, which is also known to us as just the MASS helpline. The Mass Council on Compulsive Gambling also has a hotline number. Gamblers Anonymous is having both in-person and virtual meetings, as well as Smart Recovery. Gam Talk is a little bit more of a casual online space where people basically can just kind of enter group chats to talk with one another. And there are also actually some really great phone apps as well. Bet Blocker, Gamban, Gamblers Anonymous also has an app, and then there's also something called the Toolkit. And just to move on to the next slide, there's also something through the Mass Gaming Commission, which is called voluntary self-exclusion, which I have to admit, I actually didn't know about until I was looking into doing this. Voluntary self-exclusion is basically something that is actually set up within the casinos themselves, where you basically voluntarily agree to not enter the casinos. And there are different stations set up within the casino for you to go and talk to people, and also for them to kind of keep an eye on who is trying to basically stay quote unquote sober from gambling. Another really amazing resource is the Mass Department of Public Health with the Office of Problem Gambling. So I strongly encourage you, if you're watching this, to definitely go and check out these websites. There's so much education and information on there, as well as, again, a lot of the treatment resources that I had mentioned in the previous slide. Someone had also just asked me in the chat box just now about what about instances where you have someone struggling with, say, substance use and problem gambling at the same time, or maybe someone who is struggling with problem gambling and also say a mental health issue at the same time, or maybe even all three. I've certainly seen all three occur in the same person over the course of hundreds and hundreds of therapy sessions with clients. I definitely, in that case, would really recommend, I'll just go back one slide, to definitely contact the Mass Helpline at 1-800-327-5050, just because that is a hotline that can also get you connected to substance use treatment throughout the entire state of Massachusetts. Here's another question in the chat box. Is there any way to get info on the number of people who are calling the hotline number listed on scratch ticket machines? That is a really excellent question. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I do know that I just spoke to someone at the Mass Council on Compulsive Gambling back in June, and they had mentioned to me that they hadn't seen a major uptick in people calling the Mass hotline over the course of, I'd say, March to June. That might have changed by now, but so far as I can tell for, again, just this year in particular, I'm not sure about specific numbers, but that would definitely be something that I should try and find out. Let me just move on. And then to kind of end on the topic of youth prevention, especially with the advent of Minecraft and Fortnite and esports, one of the questions that we also want to ask people, and again, please write your answer in the chat box. Excuse me if it sounds like there's a lawnmower in the background. It's just a very loud motorcycle passing by. Okay. In Somerville, how many youth did not report having someone in their household gambling for money? So let's just look at the chat box and see what kind of answers we get here. I'm seeing 50%, 60%. Any other guesses? $15, 60%. I'm seeing 65%. Okay, so all around kind of the same ballpark number. The answer is actually 86%. We are getting all of this information from the high school student survey report that we do every other year. This is the most recent data that we have from the 2018 report. I am pleased to say that Somerville youth overall, compared to other local municipalities and also state numbers and national numbers, our numbers of youth who are struggling with gambling or substance use or are witnessing people who are gambling or using substances at home, very, very low. More students actually reported seeing gambling at home, though, than people who are smoking e-cigarettes or using an illegal substance or drinking alcohol too much. The only form of kind of substance use or addictive behaviors that people were seeing at home more than gambling was actually smoking marijuana, which kind of, again, will lead us into us wanting to track this data again over the course of the next couple of years, especially with the onset and legalization of marijuana recreationally and medically. And obviously, we also want to keep an eye out for e-cigarettes and tobacco use as well, especially since vaping is becoming such a very, very common practice. And we already have scientific research data to back up the fact that specifically marijuana, alcohol, and cigarettes are very, very closely tied to problem gambling. So I'm going to stop talking for a moment here, actually, and we actually have, I believe, one or two people who are available from my office. We're going to be talking a little bit about the Somerville Photo Voice Project, which is a youth-led project that we are going to be starting this year. Eloise or Lovely, I don't know which one of you would prefer to talk right now, but I will leave the floor open to you if you want to unmute yourselves and kind of give a little bit of updates about what all this looks like.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Kira. Hello, everyone. My name is Lovely Heller, and I'm the Program Director for Somerville Cares About Prevention, or SCAP. SCAP is a community prevention coalition made up of Somerville stakeholders, including youth, who work to reduce underage drinking, substance use, and related issues like problem gambling. Currently, we're seeking passionate Somerville teens ages 13 to 17 to participate in a special photo voice project focusing on the prevention of underage and problem gambling. In general, Photo Voice projects aim to encourage youth community members to document how they are impacted by issues in their communities. And for this fun and exciting project, youth will be using photography equipment to capture images describing the gambling conditions in Somerville. This program will meet about 2 hours a week via Zoom and run about 8 weeks. And participants can receive a stipend for up to $240. For more information or to apply, please contact me at lheller@somervillema.gov. And don't forget to check out our virtual exhibit that's coming soon. And you can see Kara has a nice image of our flyer up on the screen there. And thanks for listening, everyone. Back to you, Kara.
Thank you. One other quick thing, which I remember seeing in an email recently, is for any youth who are interested in applying for this, we will be providing cameras. You do not need to bring in any of your own photography gear with you. I guess if you have that, that's great, but we will be basically providing all of the cameras for this project.
That's right.
And this is also a project that is happening across municipalities. We are trying to really spread more and more awareness of problem gambling. So there are a lot of different local communities that are actually involved in this. And obviously with, again, the shutdown, there's been some impact to that, but we are still really hoping to get a lot more awareness pushed out there and then put up, and again, in a virtual format, just for everybody to have access to. So thank you again, Lovely, so much for your part in this. I have a couple of different references here. I'm specifically going to point out one or two of them just in like very, very, very quickly, since I know we're almost out of time. If you are really interested in looking specifically at different demographic information in Massachusetts around problem gambling rates, I really encourage you to go to this second link right here, which is a UMass project. The Sigma project, the full pronunciation and spelling of which I cannot actually remember what it stands for, which is shame on me. But they have this amazing database set up that you can actually look at all of the different counties and regions in Massachusetts and see, based on demographic data, what problem gambling looks like in that particular region, again, on age, race, and other personal demographics. And again, just because of everything that's currently going on right now, there's this fantastic article right here on high-risk online gambling during the pandemic and some of the concerns that we're having around that. It's a very short article, but it's really, really well written. I definitely recommend people to check this out. And again, it is the third line down here in terms of our reference links. So I'm gonna just take a quick moment to just answer any questions that maybe did not get answered in the course of today's training series. And if you want to go ahead and either, put that into the chat box or just kind of speak out verbally, I'd be happy to get to anything that we didn't quite manage to cover. I know we had to rush through one or two segments just in the interest of time.
I have one thing.
Okay, yes.
It's not really a question, but I guess it's just a statement of really just the, I think, need for education around the advertising and the messaging and the exposure to this in the community. Right. I think in some of our other sessions that we've had, we talked about advertising on, storefronts and things like that. And,
right.
I really feel like this is another piece of that where, like you said, some stores have we have 6 winners here before, so keep coming back. Or they have the huge Keno sign, or, they have chairs and stuff set up inside so that you can, have a bag of chips, get a drink, and play Keno while you're paying. There's all these things that I think people have kind of taken for granted over time.
Right,
and,
absolutely.
I'm curious to see kind of how it progresses. And I completely forgot that Keno was a regional thing. So for whoever asked that earlier, that's a good point. We need to clarify what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. I forget that too sometimes as well. And to add a very quick little segment onto that, especially when it comes to youth prevention and when youth are becoming more aware of, just gambling sort of activities. It's so interesting. I was at a training through the Mass Council on Compulsive Gambling, again, a couple of months ago. And one of the things that the presenter mentioned to me is that the messaging is pretty subliminal in ways that we don't always really stop to think about. One of the very good examples that the presenter gave to us was actually a lot of very small collectible toys. That could be everything from Funko Pops to McDonald's Happy Meal toys, but basically, kind of that very subliminal messaging of like, oh, you just, if you just get this one, then you'll have a chance of getting all the other ones. Keep coming back to McDonald's to buy Happy Meal toys, just so that you can see that you get the whole collection. Even small things like that can definitely add to this very, again, unconscious kind of craving for, oh, if I just keep on going through the drive-through and getting more Happy Meals, I'm going to just have the whole collection of, I don't know, for my generation, it was Pokemon. I don't know about other people, but, definitely I think Pokemon was definitely the Happy Meal toy of choice for people my age, as well as Power Rangers, other action figures. It's obviously quite different now, but needless to say, the subliminal messaging starts young. We all need to be a lot more aware of it. I know I certainly am going to be a lot more aware of it moving forward for my own self. And again, more sirens. Excuse me, 1 second. Busy night out there today. But my whole point is, yes, absolutely. And again, that just makes it all the more important for us to really have a lot more community level discussions around problem gambling and who exactly it is in fact impacting. And again, hopefully with the Photo Voice Project and with trainings like this and more work again from the Mass Council, we're hopefully going to be getting more accurate information out there to folks.
Hi, Kara, it's Bonnie.
Hi, Bonnie.
Hi, I just wanted to add a quick comment of that I think this is really very powerful, everything that you've done. And I just commenting that I like the idea that we're going to do a lot more education, because I would venture to guess that if we just said to somebody, is there gambling in your family, or is, I bet a lot of people don't have a clear picture of what gambling actually is, and they may not consider something that goes on, like you said, the toy at McDonald's or something, where that could be included in what is gambling. So I'm glad we're doing that, particularly young people I'm thinking about, who may not see any danger in it or even understand what the definition of it is.
Right, absolutely. Let me think. Anyone else have any questions or any comments that they'd like to make? Just because I know it is about 7 o'clock right now.
One more comment.
Yes.
I think to kind of tie back to kind of what both of you are just saying, like, we think about the brain development with youth in terms of substance use and how it can impact it. And I feel like, some of these things, like you're saying with the Happy Meals and things, those are not like concrete or not something that people are thinking about in terms of like what that actually looks like on the brain and kind of what it looks like on the development of the brain. So I think as the research continues to develop too, I feel like there's just only going to be more and more information about, the age of onset of, gaming and a form of gambling. And kind of how the impacts of that look over time, whether that mean it primes the brain for some more problematic gambling in the future or things like that. I'd be curious to see if there's more on that.
Absolutely. And that kind of ties into a lot of other things relating to both problem gambling and other just forms of what I'm going to call dependent or addictive type behaviors. And especially with problem gambling, there's so many interesting layers to it, especially when you start to look at why people are engaging in problem gambling to begin with. I know I had mentioned a lot of substance use and mental health reasons at the beginning of all of this, but frankly, even taking away that, you also have a lot of people who are engaging in these things for, I'm gonna just even come out and say status, whether that be a professional poker player who is really trying to, again, make his career off of this, to someone who is, again, taking part in, you know, a competition for $1 million to win a League of Legends, you know, tournament. There's a lot of status, especially with our young people, that, you know, especially when you're at that age of, you know, wanting to have these really, really, how do I say this, positive social relationships with people. You know, status is definitely something that we can't overlook, but also what people plan on doing with that money that they're so-called going to be winning in problem gambling. You have a lot of people say, oh, if I won the lottery, I would donate half of it to charity and then, you know, give the other quarter of it to, you know, my mom or, you know, what have you. But then frankly, a lot of times you just end up realistically, you're hoping to win just to be able to, in order to win back your losses. Like you're not even breaking even. So again, it's quite a complicated conversation. And, you know, again, this is not to say that there aren't plenty of people who can gamble and do it in a fairly responsible way. But we do need to be thinking about, again, the warning signs for when that starts to transform into something else altogether. So I think that's all we have time for today, unfortunately. I will make a quick little request here that if you have time, we have a quick little survey. If you want to just go to the link below and just fill that out, let us know how we're doing with all of these different videos. If there's anything that we could do to improve these videos, we would very much be welcoming feedback, especially since we're doing all of this virtually for the first time, really. And we're still kind of trying to work out what is working, what's not working. So again, I would definitely recommend and urge people, please fill out that link so that I know what I can do better when it comes to these videos. And then if not, please continue to follow us on our social media. And especially as we continue to do more and more of these trainings, please ignore the Twitter thing at the very bottom. We are not using that Twitter account at the moment, but again, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we have things popping up on Instagram. Please continue to follow us as we continue on in this very, very interesting year of 2020. And